Yo, what's good everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today you and I are going to be having a chat about snare tails and about how you can use the Granular engine in Phaseplant or Bitwig or anything of the sort, provided that you have the right setup to get some really cool textures kind of like this. Without the Granular engine, which you see here, the snare sounds like this. But currently right now I'm just kind of messing around and revisiting some cool ways to get some textured snares that sound relatively interesting. And I'm going to go into all that in a second. But before I do that, let me kind of do a little bit of storytelling. If you hadn't seen it, yesterday's stream I had ZAIN, a physicist formerly known as, in the channel, and he was providing a lot of insightful and helpful information regarding not this kind of design, but how to make my overall production a lot better. And I think that this is a great opportunity to let you all know that he's got a GoFundMe going on where he's trying to beat load shedding. So he's currently in South Africa. And if you didn't know what load shedding is, it's when they turn off all of the electricity in the house or in the whole district for several hours. So he's a music producer. He's taught me a lot of things. Same thing with his buddy Cage and Aiden. Last week or 2 weeks ago, or last week, I had Saturate Records, who he's a part of, over here on the channel. So this is just one thing of like, if you get the chance and you can appreciate his work or you like what I'm doing, you can help me by helping him for the time that he's got left for his GoFundMe, and I'll leave a link in the description. Anyways, this guy has been helping me a ton with my drums, and I can't really talk about this without giving credit, even though what I'm going to be teaching you is very different. So it's inspired by that. All right, so aside from that, let's go ahead and talk about snare tails, which we're using the Granular engine in which to do so. And it's kind of self-explanatory, but what you want to do is kind of just pull up the Foley here, and you can use your own Foley. We can record Foley or do anything of the sort, but I've kind of gone through all of these and found something relatively usable. But the way that I have this set up is this right now is going into lane 1. So I've got a fundamental, some noise, and a click, and blah, blah, blah. But anything that's the regular snare is going into one lane here. And anything that is the Foley layer is going into a parallel chain. And both of these are going into the master bus, which is my typical snare, processing. So within all of this, what we're aiming to do is have a very clean fundamental. And we're going to offset the granular layer a little bit by moving and creating some delay here. And so what we want to do is kind of just set the delay to offset, so that way it doesn't get involved with the transient here. So if I were to just play the sine wave, you can hear how there's an offset. And if we were to look at this on a oscilloscope, which is over here, this is what this looks like. Which is very subtle, but you can kind of see that it's almost like having two different transients that stagger on each other. Now, normally somebody would be like, don't do that. But if you kind of look at the way that a clap works, it's actually very similar anyways. So you've got a bunch of transients that are stacked together and played very quickly next to each other to the point that your ears can't detect like the layering stuff. But this is a great way to kind of use an extra piece of Foley or, some kind of miscellaneous object in which to layer your drum sounds with, not only snares, but claps, kicks, anything that has a transient in it. So regarding the processing, what I'm doing right now, and I'll kind of play with this a little bit, I'll show you kind of some things that I've been messing with in order to see if I can like get a wider sound or something that's more interesting on the outside. And if you're interested in the fundamental of how I made the bass snare, then I've got masterclasses on that for the ARCANUM members. I also have a drum course that you can buy on my website, but that's not really all that important. You can just get some regular drums and just toss that in here or use that as that. So with the Granular engine, we're using an actual timed envelope. So this is going to play back on every fourth beat to my tempo. So by pulling off of the sustain, we get that really nice textured sound that's kind of on the outside of that. I'm going to introduce these other sounds now to bring back the high end. So with this, we kind of want to have like a long envelope shape because we don't want it to like repeat over and over, at least not for this particular sound. Although you definitely should explore creating like weird textures on the outside of your snare tails depending on what genre you're making. So regarding that, if I were to turn all of these off, this is all going into lane 2. And again, the main snare is going into lane 1, which is going into lane 3. This stuff is all rudimentary. Just look up like how to make drums loud with clipping and stuff, and yeah, blah blah blah. But with this, let's go ahead and solo this. You can't really even hear it. So by adding some distortion and by using this as like a secondary layer, we can actually get away with like wrecking this hella hard. And that's kind of the goal with this, is to just use this as a layer that we can turn down at some point and just mess it up to heck. So from here, we're distorting it, and now we're adding in some ha's because I want there to be some kind of mid-side separation. So you can also just use a mid-side, or you can use snap heap, but I find that if you separate this layer and just use a little bit of this, then you're going to have a little bit of both, but be careful because this isn't mono compatible. It's okay though, because this isn't the fundamental, but this is what it sounds like. So we're already getting much more of a stereo image. So from here, I'm adding some chorus. I'll talk about this in a second, but the chorus with a huge spread on this is going to help make this a lot wider. And it can also give some really cool sticky sounds if you turn the depth up and you turn the rate to a relatively slow amount. And by adjusting this too, you get some really watery stuff. And this was something I was trying to do for the intro of a tune that I was working on that I did on my last video. And this was a really key player in that. Yeah, you can get some really cool like bubbly sounds if you use a chorus like this. So next up, we've got some reverb, which I'm just using just a little bit of decay, like very minimal amounts. If you want your reverb snare, or you want your snare to sound like it's closer, then use more early and turn the dampen up. Let me read the description of what this says. It adds damping to high frequencies so they decay faster than the low frequencies. You got to be careful when you, not be careful, but you got to take this into consideration, because some reverbs, when you talk about damping, it becomes a high shelf, or sorry, it becomes like a low cut. So you're cutting out the lower frequencies. And sometimes dampening means whatever this is that it's describing. But in our use case for this, it's basically going to help control the tail of the snare a little bit more than just using the decay as well as the early reflections. So by doing that and keeping the size really low, we're going to have a really nice short room reverb. And then we just adjust this. Now this little guy right here, the disperser, is something else that we're going to use in order to create like a cool texture sounding thing. Just so you know what it is, a disperser, it shifts the phase of a particular frequency range. So in this particular case, whatever this curve is, and it kind of just offsets it a bit to create, well, in some cases, that's how some reverbs are made. It's technically a delay. That's a whole different can of worms, but the characteristic of it is it a lot of times gives you watery or lasery sounds. So with that, we've got a frequency shifter here, and this is really cool because we can kind of use this to manipulate the overall pitch. So I'm just going to mess around with this one in particular, and let's go ahead and turn this up, and we can kind of see how we can manipulate this sample or this playback engine to like be all weird and stuff without affecting the rest of the snare. Pretty cool. So from there, this one in particular I really liked at this, and so I think I kind of had it somewhere around here that just kind of created this sound. And so when we start to mess with that, or we turn this off, or, you know, kind of play with the different variations and stuff, we can get some really interesting variations of our snare, even though we're keeping the snare at the same fundamentals. So check this out. Likewise, in comparison, we can also change the sample. So let's say we turn this off and just listen to what it sounds like without it. Which is, you know, kind of cool as a texture or whatever. It kind of makes it more rainy, no pun intended. But we can also try different stuff like, I don't know, steel barrel, or we can even throw instruments in here to make it tonal. We can also change the root note of this, so this will have a lot to do with the timbre of this as well. Hopefully you can tell the difference while I'm kind of moving this stuff around, and then again we can reintroduce the frequency shifter, and we can also change this as well. Now what's really cool is if you're looking for something that has a lot of different variations and stuff, then what I found is that you can kind of let's say like metal grinding is like you've got all of this sample to work through. So if you start from here and you start to change the position, then you're going to get something a little bit different each time, and you can really start to take advantage of finding these different kinds of just cool stuff that still has the same fundamental because it's being pushed later since we're using the delay on it. And you can create just a ton of different really sick things provided that you use the right kind of Foley sample or with the right mindset and the right kind of like Foley processing. That being said, quickly, because I want to play a little bit more, but I am using some OTT and glue compressor and clipping on the outside. That's where ZAIN comes back into play with just messing around with different stuff. But if I were to turn the OTT off, we'll keep the glue because it's just clipping. It's clipping once and then clipping twice, different algorithms and stuff. You could literally just get away with just you doing this. But let's see what that sounds like. Oh, that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and move this around a bit. Then you can get kind of cool stuff like that that's almost rhythmic. You can also adjust the timing of this, so that way like it's almost like creating an echo or a delay. And it's different every time, which is really cool. So I just wanted to kind of show you some options that you can use when creating percussive sounds with this. And like this is just scratching the surface, because if you've seen any of the generative things that I do when it comes into like making different timbres and stuff, you know, you start adding FM to this, you start modulating and randomizing the pitch, and then you start adding reverb and delays to this, and it gets nuts. But I think that that's probably enough for a single video. And if you want to learn more about that stuff, then I suggest that you subscribe to the channel, because that's really what I'm focused on and how I'm trying to constantly come up and make new sounds or new, you know, heavy, just, yeah, distorted creatures of life. So yeah, again, shout out to you, ZAIN, for inspiring this patch. Shout out to Saturate Records. If you guys get the chance, you know, support ZAIN. He really is a lovely person, and he hangs around the channel a lot and is incredibly helpful. With that being said, if you all want to support me, alckemy.com, or like the video, leave a comment and let me know if you learned anything or if you have anything to contribute to, you know, as an idea. Thanks guys, I'll see you in the next one.